Hey, welcome back, Faithful Politics listeners and watchers. If you're watching our YouTube channel, we're so happy to have you. I'm your political host, Will Wright, joined as always by my faithful co-host, Pastor Josh Burtram. How's it going?
Good. How are you, Will?
I'm doing excellente. And today we have with us, coming back to us actually, Kiera Butler. She's a national correspondent at Mother Jones and is out with a very, I don't even know how to describe it. It's a long form investigative analysis of Christian Zionists. And that's about as best I could probably put it, but you're going to tell us more about it. But welcome back to the show, Kiera.
Thanks so much for having me back.
Yeah. So I just want to jump right into this. So this article is long and I love it. And I swear, we could probably spend the next 3 hours talking about all the little details that are in the article, but maybe we just start off first. Just give us the 30,000 foot view of what the article was about and kind of what was it that led you to write it.
Well, the article is really long, so thank you for slogging through it. I think it's upwards of 5,000 words. Every time I write something at that length, I want to add a little italicized note to readers apologizing.
I'm so sorry.
I'm sorry. But it's basically an exploration, as you said, of this world of Christian Zionism. These very deep-pocketed and very politically powerful U.S. evangelical groups that are funneling money to Israel, mostly for reasons that have to do with their theology.
That's awesome. So, it's not awesome that we have Christian Zionists. Maybe someone probably think it is. I guess the Christian Zionists would think that it's awesome. How do you imagine they might defend the large amounts of money that they're spending and that's being spent on Israel and the political influence that you kind of outline in your article, which of course we'll get into? But how do you think they might defend this love and almost elevating of Israel above all other nations in some sense?
Well, that's a really interesting question because there's, I think, what they would actually say in public versus, what they have said in private. But maybe I can start by kind of explaining some of the theological beliefs that underpin this movement.
Sure.
There are a number of evangelicals who believe in a certain version of end times theology. Some people call it eschatology. And in their preferred version of the end of the world, the Jews all return to Israel. And that is kind of a sign that the return of the Messiah is coming. And then the Messiah comes, and then the Jews either convert to Christianity or are damned to hell. So it's a very kind of dramatic, kind of cosmic version of the end of days. And it's not a particularly nice one for Jewish people. And so that's where you kind of get these two versions of the, privately discussed version where this is what happens in the end times. And then there's the public face of it where you have evangelicals saying, we're friends of Israel. We believe in protecting these people who historically have been persecuted. We want to lend our support to these people who are battling enemies on all sides. So those are kind of the two different perspectives on what's actually going on, I would say.
Yeah, so it's this interesting phenomena where we have to deal we typically don't think about dealing with theology in politics. Obviously we know that they mix all the time, but it's a theological thing that seems to be driving policy. And if I understand what you're saying, that's the claim you're making, right? That and I think you do a good job backing that up. But that there's this theology that's driving policy, and I want to make sure that I'm understanding it. That what you're saying is that there's this large group of very well funded organizations that are tapping into a very deep belief in end times eschatology from a certain segment of the evangelical world. Certainly from it, it's like a segment of the evangelical world that then is a segment of the Christian world that's a segment of the world. So it's a segment of a segment of a segment. And they're basically like, hey, we need to restore like the Jewish, like, what is it exactly? We need to restore the Jewish temple and
Well,
way of
yeah, I mean,
worship so that we can
that's
go
part of
ahead.
it. You know, there are a number of kind of things that are described in the Bible that they believe need to happen in order for the second coming to take place. And one of those is the restoration of the temple on the Temple Mount. Another one of them is what they call the ingathering of the Jews. So this is the idea that all of the Jews will return from all of the corners of the world to Israel. And this is something that we can talk more about this, but that these evangelical Christian Zionist groups are very interested in facilitating this idea. In Hebrew, it's called Aliyah. And it's, you know, it's something that is important in the Jewish faith as well, but obviously for different reasons.
So if you are a person listening or a person that read your article, and Zionism is not a word that you use on a regular basis, can you like just help us understand, like, so when we say like Christian Zionism, like what are we sort of referring to or talking about?
Yeah, so when Zionism is usually used in a kind of political context to describe support for Israel as the rightful homeland of the Jews. And, you know, mostly, especially post-October 7th, when you hear the term Zionism or Zionist, you often think about Jewish people. But there's a whole other group of people, Christian Zionists, who, for the reasons, the kind of biblical, theological reasons that I described, also consider themselves to be Zionists, Christian Zionists.
So whenever I think of like large dollar donations from Jewish organizations, I generally think of like APAC. I mean, to be honest, that's probably the only one I really know. You mentioned some others in your article, but I'm just curious, like all of this money is sort of spearheaded by a person I believe you mentioned in your article, Yael, if I'm saying that right.
I think it's Yael.
Yeah. So like talk to us a little bit about like who this person is, what organization they are a part of, and kind of like where are they getting all this money?
Yeah, so this is Yael Eckstein. I think I'm pronouncing her last name right. I'm not positive. She is the CEO of a group called the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. Now, what the name kind of makes it sound like is like, you know, a multi-faith, you know, beautiful, many religions coming together kind of a group. And Yael Eckstein herself, she is Jewish. She's an Orthodox Jew. She lives in Israel. But 90% of their money comes from U.S. evangelical Christians. And I think what's really notable about this group is how big it is and how much money it actually has. The last year that I found 990s for this group was 2023. And in that year, the group brought in $271 million. That
It's
is
remarkable.
significantly more than like Amnesty International USA, the ACLU Foundation, Human Rights Watch, these charities that you really think of as being like, you know, household names. This group is incredibly powerful. And the other thing to know is that it's not the only group like it out there. You know, there's also Christians United for Israel, which is also, you know, incredibly deep pocketed. And then there are all of these, you know, individual churches that don't have to disclose their finances, but are nevertheless kind of funneling money through some of these Christian Zionist intermediary groups and giving money to Israel. Now, the money that goes to Israel is used for many different things. Some of it might go to humanitarian efforts, rebuilding after the attacks of October 7th. A lot of it goes to Aliyah efforts, this effort to, it's an initiative by the Israeli government to facilitate immigration to Israel, which Christian Zionists like because of, it fulfills their idea about this ingathering of Jews. Some of the money is actually even going to settlements. So it is directly supporting folks who are living on this land that does not technically belong to Israel.
So I get my one of my questions. So let's think about Netanyahu for a second. So I don't think he's an evangelical Christian. I don't think. Maybe I'm wrong. Will, you might know if Netanyahu's an evangelical Christian.
You're
I don't
the
think
faithful
he is.
host. I'm the political host.
Yeah, but Netanyahu's political, right? Okay, but yeah, and so I guess I'm wondering, so he's bringing them over, but he's not doing these things for the same reasons that they want, right? So it's like, hey, we want you to do this so that you're going to be so the guy in the pews who hears the person from one of these organizations and they're asking and they're saying, hey, if you give $9.99.99 a month, you can get, we'll send you a free, Jerusalem Bible, and then you can pay this. And what you're doing is you're speeding on the end times. But I don't think Netanyahu thinks that. So what's the tension there, if there is any, and what's the end game for Netanyahu that you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that was a question that I posed to many of the sources that I talked to for this. And basically the answer that I got from all of them was that this is a kind of a mutually beneficial relationship, right? I mean, to be honest, the Jews don't believe the same stuff that the evangelical Christians believe about
Absolutely
the end
not.
times. But having the support of this, deep-pocketed and also politically powerful group of people in the United States is advantageous for them. So it's a relationship that benefits both sides. And I don't think, you have to have Netanyahu or anybody in the Israeli government, believing that the end of days is drawing nigh, and the Jews are all going to convert in order for them to kind of sign on to this this source of support.
I want to go back just a minute to what you were talking about, all the different things that they are doing in support of what's happening with the Gaza situation. And one of the things that stood out to me was sort of the Christian Zionist involvement with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which one, if you can just kind of just let us know what it is, but then more importantly is how, depending on what you think about the GHF and its effectiveness or issues, I think will largely probably color how you view sort of their involvement. So just unpack that for us. Tell us what that involvement is, and then what is the GHF?
Yeah, so the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is an American project that was set up as an alternative to UN aid to Gaza. Its leader is a guy named Johnny Moore. He is an evangelical Christian. And basically, the group has gotten a lot of criticism because it has set up aid sites in these places where the folks who are seeking aid end up being very vulnerable to attacks. And there's been some very interesting reporting on not just Johnny Moore, but some of the other folks that are involved in the on-the-ground efforts there, having tattoos that suggest, allegiance to Christian nationalist groups and, other extremist groups. So this is, concerning to international observers, to say the very least, that a group that has this kind of ideology has been trusted by the Trump administration to be in charge of America's involvement in aid to Gaza.
And so I would love to dig in to that a little bit more and get even help us understand more of why this is problematic. I guess I get that it can feel, someone looking at it can feel weird. Again, I'm thinking about my friends that would be thinking, well, I don't see what the problem is. I don't get it. I don't understand. They're just giving them, and are they just giving? Why can't someone else do the humanitarian stuff? Why is this problematic? What's really going on? How do we know that? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, the idea is that you have these folks who subscribe to this end times theology, right? Remember, this is the idea that in the end of days, that, the Jews are all going to come back to Israel and get, raptured away. And, then that will bring about the second coming of the Messiah. And this is, a group of people that believe in helping Israel for that reason. So, if you have the group that is in charge of America's aid to Gaza believing in this kind of theology, their allegiance is not to humanitarian aid; it's to protecting Israel because of their faith framework, because of their beliefs about what's going to happen in the end times.
Got it. Is a better way to kind of look at this, especially from an outside observer that doesn't know anything about this group or really any other group, is how comfortable are you with sort of a private company having such influence on American policy? Because I think to some degree we're all comfortable to some level, because we're okay, we hear Heritage, we hear Center for American Progress, and these think tanks that are definitely interjecting and helping create policy, good, better, and different. But this organization seems to have a level of influence that's disproportional than some of these other organizations. Would you say that that's an accurate way to categorize it, or am I missing something?
I would say Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is probably more influential than, say, Heritage, in that they are responsible for on-the-ground aid, whereas Heritage is a think tank that comes up with policy ideas. I think the Heritage, they came up with Project Esther, which was a big kind of Christian Zionist initiative as well. These organizations, I think it's important to realize that they are all coordinating with each other. So the idea that you've got one little Christian Zionist group over here and another little one over there, and they're all out there on their own. It's a it's a very well networked world. So I don't think that it makes sense to look at these groups in isolation.
Got it. I want to ask you about something that on the surface might make a listener chuckle. But I also want to be careful, and just for myself, I'm just naturally a laugher. That's my I don't know, coping mechanism. but the people that believe this really do believe it. So I just want to respect that, and I want to respect that because I want to ask you about the Red Heifer Project, which was something that really it stood out to me, and I was I have questions.
Wild.
So talk to us about the Red Heifer Project.
Yeah, I missed it when it was actually happening. I missed it at the time that it was actually going on. And so when I found out about it, in retrospect, when I was reporting this piece, I was how could I possibly have missed this wild story? But basically, you have this guy, Brian Stinson, who's a businessman in Texas. And he decided that, he wanted to personally help bring about this end of days, this, return of the Messiah. And in his interpretation, and I think, other Christian Zionists have the same interpretation of the Bible, one of the things that is important is this sacrifice of an unblemished red heifer in order to rebuild the temple on the Temple Mount. So, because of this belief, this guy, Brian Stinson, I'm sorry, I'm saying his name wrong. It's Byron Stinson. Byron Stinson. He spent $500,000, $500,000, finding unblemished red heifers. He brought in a team from Israel of rabbis and went to all different ranches in search of the perfect red heifers. He identified a bunch, winnowed it down to, I think, like maybe 5 candidates. He, got through all of this red tape of transporting livestock on, an international flight and flew them to Israel. And this, this did make international headlines at the time. I missed it, but it did. It was in the news. And actually, after October 7th, a spokesman for Hamas listed that bringing the red heifers in as one of the reasons for the attacks. Grain of salt for sure, but nevertheless, that it caught the attention of Hamas. So that's that story.
Yeah, that's really wild, and it is in the Bible. Will was asking me, is that in the Bible? And it is in Numbers 19, but I don't think it's being applied correctly. It's not how I would apply it. And I think we could look at I would love to see their exegesis and their hermeneutics and try to understand where they're getting that from, because I can't follow that exactly. And this whole thing to me is really, really, it's challenging because I grew up in a Pentecostal church. I grew up in a Pentecostal denomination. I was ordained in a Pentecostal denomination. I have I'm very sympathetic to Pentecostal views and interpretations of the Bible. And yet this particular thing, though, this is like, I never understood this. I never was into it. No one I really knew was into this idea that Israel is we need to protect Israel at all costs. It was kind of like, hey, we're going to, we have a people that's our ally. I never saw it theologically. And even my dad's a pastor and he never ever taught me to think of Israel as yeah, they're coming back. It's going to be reestablished, all that. That's a very particular interpretation within Christianity. And I guess I know that we've been talking about this, but what are they doing? CUFI, I guess that's the Christians United for Israel. And then you said, what was the big one that had 200 million that you just mentioned? Was that CUFI or different?
No, that's the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews.
The International Fellowship of Christians and Jews with these massive budgets. And what are they doing inside America? How are they making a difference? What are they doing? What's happening that it's become so widespread? And I also am interested if it's connected to I hear a lot of people now talking about this almost calling Jesus Yeshua, which is the Jewish name, and they don't want to in reestablishing Sabbath laws, or doing I mean, I've heard several people talk about that just recently.
That was actually what got me interested in this in the first place. I was doing some reporting last year for some pieces on Christian nationalism. and I was in rural Pennsylvania, and I went to like an all-day prayer rally out in farm country in a barn. And in many ways, it was like a lot of other, prayer rallies, what you would expect. There were, there was a bunch of different speakers. There were pastors. There was, it was a charismatic event. So, there were people speaking in tongues. But what stood out to me was that there were a lot of Israeli flags. There were people wearing prayer shawls. There were people blowing on shofars. And then at one point, there was a group of teenagers from a local evangelical church that they erected a huppah, which is the kind of canopy that is kind of the centerpiece of a Jewish wedding. And then they started dancing the hora, like the Hava Nagila. And I had never seen anything like that. And then, as I sort of began to go to more of these kinds of events for this reporting, I saw this kind of thing everywhere. And, it struck me like these are evangelical churches that are like having Passover seders and building sukkahs, and, the appropriation of Jewish culture seemed to me to be really widespread and really remarkable. And I have to say also that I read the memoir written by Byron Stinson, the rancher who got the Red Heifer. And he talks about in this memoir, like hearing God's voice for the first time when he was 13 years old. And he refers to that experience as his bar mitzvah. So this kind of like, this appropriation is really everywhere. And I've asked folks about it. And, what the Christians who are doing this kind of thing will say is that there is a shared heritage, that both Christians and Jews believe in the Old Testament, that you can't have Christianity without Judaism in some ways, which is totally true.
Absolutely.
But to me, it seems to be going beyond that in some ways.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Again, I think it's a really bad theology personally. And I could talk more about that, but go ahead, Will. I mean,
yeah, there was one name that showed up in your reporting that was familiar to me just because of all the episodes we did on like New Apostolic Reformation stuff, and that was Dutch Sheets. So I'd love for you just to kind of unpack like what's his sort of like place in all of this, and why did you include him?
I am going to have to look back at my piece so that I can make sure that I'm getting this right.
Yeah.
So Dutch Sheets has been involved in this movement for a while. The first time that his involvement sort of stood out to me was actually during Trump's first term. Dutch Sheets was one of the people who supported moving the embassy in Israel, the U.S. embassy in Israel, to Jerusalem. And this was, seen by many Christians as a biblically significant move. And Dutch Sheets has spoken since then in support of that move. So I guess the other thing that I would say about Dutch Sheets is that some of your listeners might have heard about him in the context of the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol. And so, this is the same guy who has been, talking about the move of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem as biblically significant, was a guy who was, participating in kind of whipping up crowds ahead of that Capitol insurrection.
Man. So I really, this is like, so again, interesting to me because of how I grew up, because of the people that I've known that, and the people I know now that are even moving in this direction of this almost like Jewishness. And again, obviously, Jesus was Jewish. Every single apostle was Jewish. ancient Jewish, right? So that is one thing, and that's like temple gets destroyed in 70 AD. There is no sacrifice. There is no official Jewish sacrificial system as outlined in the Torah for thousands of years, right? It hasn't been there. And then we want to bring it back, and the idea that bringing it back, that's going to again bring in God's return. Do you have any idea like how like what are like Jewish people thinking about this in Israel? Like, do they want the temple? Well, one, like that's going to start an absolute war, because of the sacredness of that place to Islam. So it's going to start a war. At least in my opinion. I could hopefully not. But I don't know. It could. It could start a war. It'll be an issue. And then, do Jewish people even want a sacrificial system opened up again, that of the kind they're talking about? Is that what they're saying? That it would be a full sacrificial system, or are they trying to take one red heifer, kill it, put it on an altar, and say that's enough? Or is it reinstating the sacrificial system as a whole?
I cannot
Not sure.
begin to imagine what they have in mind. But I guess one thing that I would point out is that, and you guys know this, all your listeners probably know this, but I think it's just important to keep in mind that, just like not all Christians believe, in the end times theology that we're talking about, not all Jews believe the same thing either. Israel is an incredibly diverse place, and
absolutely,
you have Jews who agree wholeheartedly with Netanyahu, and then you have Jews who really don't agree with him. So I don't know. I mean, I always, it's so complicated to write about this stuff and to talk about this stuff, but I always try to keep in mind that these groups are not monoliths by any stretch of the imagination.
No, they're not. And I imagine like not having, like, did you have any theological training or anything like on, and I'm not trying to, but yeah, so I imagine like doing that. It's like wading into like really thorny areas. Like I'm trying to imagine if I was going into like a subject that I hadn't been formally trained in, like, it's just like, I'm trying to write about this. I'm trying to understand it, but there's these motivations in there. They're like, what is going on? And I don't, that's how I would feel. I just, I know it's pretty difficult. Go ahead, Will.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure I ask you about Huckabee, because Mike Huckabee, I don't know if he will consider himself a Christian Zionist or not, but he is a very huge character in kind of the Christian evangelical movement, and now he's the ambassador to Israel. So, like, can you talk a little bit about like Mike Huckabee's kind of connection to this movement? Because I'm assuming an organization like the GHF can't work in Israel unless Mike Huckabee gives some sort of approval. I'm not sure.
Yeah. So Trump made history when he named Huckabee, who was the former Arkansas governor, a former Republican presidential candidate, and also a Baptist minister. He was the first evangelical Christian to serve as ambassador to Israel. In the recent past, that role has been traditionally filled by Jewish people. So Huckabee has like a long history with like a fascination with Israel. He first traveled there in the 70s. And he says he's visited Israel 100 times, which I'm like 100 times. Like the amount of time spent on a plane is like mind-boggling. But he has said some pretty, I don't know, I guess provocative things about his stance on Israel-Palestine relations. He said in 2008, there's no such thing as a Palestinian. He said that the term Palestinian was nothing more than a political tool to try and force land away from Israel. And then in 2018, on a visit to the West Bank settlement of Efrat, He laid a brick in that settlement as a symbol of his support. He was also part of that group of pastors who really was happy that Trump moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. So this is a guy who has strong convictions and a deep history with Israel. Has he ever called himself a Christian Zionist? Not that I know of, but I would say from his statements, his position is clear.
So I was just looking at some more of the data, and it looks like that IFCJ, the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, it has 3.6 billion that has been given since its founding. I need to get their marketing strategy and fundraising strategy. Will we need to get their fundraising strategy?
We only need
they got
2,000, really,
of money. Holy smokes! And so, okay, so we have Jerusalem as a recognition and embassy, right? What about Golan? I don't know if I'm saying that right, or the Golan. It's like an area of Syria that they've
Golan
taken.
Heights. Yeah.
What is it called?
Golan
The Golan
Heights.
Yeah, and then the what else like are we seeing that they're looking like? Hey, we've seen some serious, like for our listeners who haven't read the article, they've seen some serious like steps in this direction. We know the Jerusalem embassy. We know this sense of Gaza, like this almost the way they're treating, like the way they are treating Palestine and Palestinians. So what else is there that they're looking at? And someone like who's a Zionist, they're looking at, they're like, this is exactly what's happening, exactly how prophecy is saying, and this is where things are going. Like, are there other major rocks they're either waiting for, I guess this heifer thing, the red heifer, or that are happening or about to happen? I guess how close do they think they are? Maybe that's another way to put it. Where are we in the process? If
I don't know.
that.
I actually have wondered the same thing, because when you're talking, it's almost like talking about like geological time, like, when exactly is the big earthquake going to be? Like, is it
right.
like now, or 400 years from now, like equally likely? I don't know, but yeah, I don't know exactly what timeline they're working on, but I will say that one other significant thing that we touched on before is this idea of Aliyah, or what they like to call the ingathering of the Jews to Israel. And these groups are spending significant amounts of money to make that happen. So, you have efforts to resettle Jews from Ukraine in recent years. A lot of American pastors have been raising money specifically to bring Jews from Ukraine to Israel. But not just Ukraine. Also, there are groups that claim Jewish heritage in India, and there are Christian groups that are trying to resettle them.
So how do they do that? Do they just go to them and say, "Hey guys, come on back to Jerusalem. We're going to pay your way"? Is that what they're doing?
If you think about, like, I think that they're kind of focusing in some ways on like conflict zones. Like, maybe if you're living in Ukraine and you don't have a lot of resources, then I don't know, like having somebody pay for you to resettle somewhere else might seem like a good deal. I don't know. But it's also, the Israeli government is very into this initiative. Is like they have a whole branch to do this work as well. Because again,
they're trying to get all Jews in the world to live in Israel. Is that the idea, or that kind of?
I don't know if they're explicitly like all Jews in the world, but
as many as possible.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, the idea of Aliyah, like, it's a Hebrew word, right? Like, it's important. It's an important concept in Judaism as well. And, in fact, like every year at Passover, Jews say next year in Jerusalem. This idea of going to Israel, whether it's to move there or to make a pilgrimage there, is like it's a mitzvah in Judaism. It's a really big deal. But again, for different reasons from what Christian Zionists want to do. But again, it's this relationship where it's like, this is the Israeli government has its reasons for wanting to bring Jews to resettle in Israel, and Christian Zionists have their reasons, and it actually ends up being a pretty good partnership.
With Trump in office now, however many months, probably at least like 50. Like, I'm curious on what does Christian Zionist like influence look like to you within sort of like the Trump administration, and maybe wording it differently is like, what can the American people see, as a direct reflection of Christian Zionist influence within the administration?
Well, we already talked about Huckabee, and there are a few other really significant folks to know about. One is Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, who made headlines most recently for his colorful speech to generals the other day, but he is also a devoted Christian Zionist. During his confirmation hearing, he said, "I am a Christian and I robustly support the state of Israel and its existential defense." He's been to, just like Huckabee, he's been to Israel many, many times. He has a tattoo of a Jerusalem cross, which is a symbol from the coat of arms of the ancient kingdom of Jerusalem. And it's a common symbol for Christian nationalism in the Crusades. He, at an Israeli news conference in 2018, he said the declaration of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel was a miracle, and there's no reason why the miracle of the reestablishment of the temple on the Temple Mount is not possible. Again, that's this idea of, taking over the Temple Mount for Israel that, as you guys were saying, could, cause a lot of problems, if not a world war. So that's Hegseth. And then the other figure to really know about is Mike Johnson, House Speaker Mike Johnson. Again, he was another one of these folks who supported the recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital and the embassy move. In 2023, he backed a plan to provide $14.5 billion in military aid to Israel by taking funds away from the IRS. Right after the October 7th attacks, he tweeted that the U.S. House of Representatives must take all necessary action to end Hamas forever. And then recently, just as recently as like 2 months ago, he was in Israel visiting the settlements, which is a kind of a provocative move in and of itself. And he declared while he was there that the West Bank is the rightful property of the Jewish people, and said that the area must remain an integral part of Israel. So it's really, those three figures, I would say, really amount to a pretty robust Christian Zionist presence within the administration.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Do we have any idea why like these characters have become so close to Donald Trump and have been given such like power? Like, why is I know that no one can read Donald Trump's mind, and I'm not asking you to do that, and I'm asking you to do something impossible. But in your opinion, from what you've done, like, why did he choose this like very specific Zionist like people to bring around him in support? I'd just love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think each of those guys, Johnson, Hegseth, and Huckabee, they kind of each have their own history with Trump. But more broadly speaking, I would say it probably goes back to Trump's relationship with Paula White-Cain. She's his spiritual advisor. She is connected to the New Apostolic Reformation, which your listeners are probably familiar with. And honestly, I think that, they met like years and years ago, and Trump realized that Paula White-Cain had an incredibly, powerful and large following in this group of evangelicals that increasingly associates with the New Apostolic Reformation. This, the idea that Christians are called to take over the government, that, the kind of free mixing of nationalist and religious rhetoric. And I think, Trump realized that those ideas are very powerful, and that if he could get this block of folks to vote for him and to support him, then their message of Christian faith and politics being intertwined could be very helpful to him.
Looking ahead, I'm curious, like what are some flashpoints that you'll be watching, especially, as we get into this ceasefire, I don't know if you want to call it that, between Gaza, Israel, and maybe here domestically. Like what are some things that you'll be looking for, especially kind of with this movement and what they're doing?
Well, I'm definitely going to be keeping a close eye on what's happening next week. I think the idea of the plan that Trump has laid out for, peace, I don't know, like it seems a little bit optimistic to me, I guess, or simplistic, but, we'll see what happens with that. And honestly, I am going to be over the next, I don't even know how long, the next year at least, I'm going to be tracking this movement. I'm going to be, continuing to see what these incredibly powerful and, wealthy groups are doing with their money, how they are attracting donors here in the United States. And to the extent that's possible, I'm going to be, trying to follow where that money is going in Israel.
Yeah, I think that's really good, and we'd love to have you back on to kind of talk and see where this money's going. I'm sure after you write your next article or whatever it might be as you're tracking it. Why do you think, just like it's the last big question, why do you think this is really, really important for most Americans to know, and especially for Christians that might be reading and looking at this or listening to this? Why is this important for us to be aware of?
Well, I think it's important because of the closeness of, like we were talking about, how this movement is so close to the locus of political power in the United States. That this reaches to the highest levels of American government. So that's one reason, the political implications. And then the other reason, again, is just the amount of money. There are Christians who were, I think at the beginning of our conversation, you talked about like this idea of like, for $9.99 a month, you can get your Jerusalem Bible or your like limited edition IDF.
Help shofar. Ukrainian Jewish people move to Jerusalem. I've seen that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've seen, people selling a, special edition shofar for evangelical Christians or whatever, like shofar from the IDF or something. And, there are people who are giving a lot of money. There are people who are going to church on Sunday and hearing their pastors. I've heard this time and time again, the pastors asking for tithes to go to this cause. So just on a very basic consumer level, I think it's important for Christians to know about this.
I really like that. Kiera, thanks so much for coming on and spending some time with us today. Where can people get your article? I know Stu Mother Jones, but how do you recommend them getting it? And what other stuff are you working on right now?
Motherjones.com is where everything that I write lives, so you can easily find it all there. And this one actually went into the print edition, so if you're a print subscriber, you will see it there. Right now I've been kind of distracted lately by RFK Jr. So I've been doing a lot of RFK Jr. reporting. Lots of Tylenol, autism, that whole thing. So I'm kind of taking a break from the religion reporting to cover that at the moment. But religion
It's
reporting
probably good for your health.
Is it?
Or maybe not. Maybe it's terrible for your health.
Yeah. But I love doing the religion reporting. I always want to get back to doing that. So I will be doing more of that in the future.
That's cool. So should I take Tylenol or not?
Yeah. I mean, don't take like 9 Tylenols or anything, but like.
Don't have the whole bottle?
Don't have
I think I already knew that. All right, good. Well, Kiera, thank you. Really, seriously, it's always good to hear you. Always good to see you. And thanks for your work and trying to bring the truth as you see it, but the truth to people. And I appreciate that. Thanks for doing that.
Thank you so much for
having me. We need people like you.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
We love our reporters here on Faithful Politics. We don't think you're the woke, evil, horrible joke media like some people do. So thank you for all your work. And to our friends and guys that have joined us today, our listeners and viewers, thank you for being here. Make sure you're liking, subscribing, doing all that stuff. And hey, you know what? If you're thinking about a place to send $107 million, I got a really good podcast I can think of. I'm sure Kiera has some ideas, and I know Will does. We'll help you out. Let us know, guys. And until next time, keep your conversations not right or left, but up.